If you've just joined us, the voices you're hearing alongside mine, our panellists tonight are Abdul Akbar, presenter at Spire FM, and Fahim Qureshi, Arts and Community Engagement Manager for Luton Culture. Let's talk about retiring. Would it be fair for the government to raise the pension age to 75? A review of the state pension age could mean people joining the workforce today will have to wait until their mid-70s before they retire, experts have warned. Those under the age of about 55 will be affected by the shake-up, which will consider what the state retirement age should be from 2028. Currently, the state pension age is set to be 67 for both men and women by 2028. Now, before we open this out to panel, we've got Hertfordshire-based economist and wealth manager Jonathan Davis, who joins me on the line now. Jonathan, thanks for your time tonight.
Pleasure, Yasmeen.
So first of all, let's look at it from the perspective of simplicity. Is this just a numbers game? Is it pure common sense that more of us will now have to work till our mid-70s?
Well, it's numbers in the sense of it's clear mathematics. Whatever way you look at it, the UK and indeed most of the developed world is effectively bankrupt. We're only getting by because we're borrowing tens of billions of pounds a year. The fact is, for decades, and in particular the last 15 or 20 years, governments have promised, or political parties, should I say, have promised massive levels of services and saying it's not going to cost you anymore as we go into a general election. And sure enough, we don't get extra taxes. What the government does is extra borrowings. And the numbers, I mean, we can go through them if you want, but the numbers are absolutely, literally astronomical. And ultimately, we're at the end game. The piper is finally being paid. And as your introduction said, those who are entering the workforce now are likely to be affected by this in 40 or 50 years' time. So, it's not going to happen in the next several years, but yes, the numbers are crystal clear. And frankly, I find it really disappointing that the mainstream media is focusing on the hardship and not focusing on what has brought this about. Overpromise and underdeliver.
But isn't it a case, Jonathan, is one thing to sort of focus on the hardship is because that's what people are going to be facing. They think of it they always think of it in personal circumstances, don't they? That I will have to work until my mid-70s.
And the current generation in their, say, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, they were happy to vote for successive political parties who kept offering them fanciful promises. And if the media had picked up on this, which they didn't, then it would have been darn obvious that it wasn't affordable. And that is why, as I say, we have borrowed far more than we should have done. We've had services that we couldn't afford, and ultimately the older generation has brought this upon their kids and their grandkids.
Jonathan, thank you. Well, let's just put the media blame to one side for just a second and go back to our panel on this. Fahim, I'll come to you on this, not because you're the older the elder one on the panel tonight, yeah. But how do you feel when you hear about possibly having to retire at 75?
Well, hopefully I'm not going to be retiring at the age of 75 because I've worked for 30 years now. Yeah. I've paid my taxes for 30 years. I've paid into a private pension scheme for 30 years. And I've paid my national insurance, which I think is going to go up from next month for the last 30 years plus. So I'll be fairly miffed if I have to work till 75 or 81 or whatever the thinking is at the moment. And also, I mean, where are the jobs? As the economic focus moves eastwards, where are the jobs going to be?
Do you have grown-up children who are working?
I have a son who's 26, who's living in Berlin and working in Berlin. He's relocated there now, and he says to me, "Dad, I'm not going to come back because I love Berlin and Germany so much, and the quality of life is much better there." So he's been there about 2 years working, and then I got remarried, so I've got kind of very young kids, from 8 to the age of 11, three very young kids.
These are the kind of things that would affect.
They would indeed affect those kids, and we're already, myself and my wife, are already thinking about investments for them to help them with education, etc. So I'm very worried for them. If
And you're worried for them, but you heard what Jonathan had to say there about voting for governments who sold you off on a promise, as it were. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well,
I'm not saying you voted for them personally.
I probably did actually, but I mean, I would say to that, whoever you vote for, you get the system wins, and if the system is what we've had for the last since the Second World War, that's the system.
Jonathan's still with us. He may want to respond to that. Jonathan Davies.
We're getting into really big neoliberal economic issues now. I would say to you that what we have is social democracy, and Fahima is effectively right that in a social democratic model, in effect, as the metaphor is, two wolves and a sheep sit down to dinner. Guess whose dinner? And that is, in a sense, what we've got. And ultimately, the system is severely wrong in what it's doing. For example, and by the way, I'm a capitalist, I'm a free marketer, and yet they bailed out the banks with £1,000 billion of our kids' money. If they hadn't done that, I suspect we wouldn't have been having this conversation.
Abdul.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. And I think he's spot on there, Jonathan, is because we are effectively paying the younger generation. I'm 35 myself, and we're effectively paying for the sins of those who are older than us and who are going to be well far beyond into their retirement, especially when I get to the ages being articulated here. I'm personally planning for a retirement of 50. That's my game plan.
That's pretty optimistic.
But very optimistic. But, one thing that I've been led to believe by my parents, and it's been working so far, it is aim high, aim extremely high as you can, and if you fall below par, then at least you're going to be relatively okay. I think the other challenge also is, I think Jonathan's got an interesting point, but I'd love to know his solution, because it's interesting on that. It's all good complaining and saying, well, there's an issue here with the system, but what is the right system? From my perspective, Jonathan, I reckon the right system is actually to increase taxes and get those contributions from those earning the most from society. What do you reckon?
Effectively, what you're saying there is the solution is socialism, which is an amazing thing. I have to smile because nowhere in history ever has socialism actually worked. The answer, in fact, is capitalism, which is what we don't have. And for example, bailing out the banks, to use the example I've already used, was not capitalism. It was cronyism, it was fascism, it's whatever you want to call it. What it wasn't was capitalism. So what we need to do is, if the problem was we borrowed too much, we need to stop borrowing and we need to pay down debt. That's the solution.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you. Just a final quick word back to both of you. Do you think, we know a lot of us don't think and plan ahead. We've seen endless research that says people aren't very good at planning for their future financially. Do you think Asians are worse or better? And I know this is anecdotal, but what were the messages you were given about paying into a pension, for example?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. That's a great question, because I think, generally speaking, people in my age category are not planning ahead. One of the things that I did when I started working in my 20s was, cut this pension. The employer pensions don't need it at the moment.
Would rather have the money.
It's ages away. Would rather have the money to buy some food or pay for the rent or whatever. So it's really interesting. But right now, in my mid 30s, I am thinking that actually I do need some kind of nest egg. And one thing I'm looking at, and one thing that others around me have done, which has worked out quite well, is property. But even property in Luton has gone up some 100k. If you're looking at houses around the Bushmead area, you're looking at an increase in 30 to 40% over the last couple of years, which is crazy. So
great. Abdul's final line on this is that we're all doomed.
Well, a bit like Jonathan's. No. I mean, I think by and large the Asian community, the right message has gone out there. My father said exactly the same. Don't rent, buy. And this was when I was 20. So I bought my first property at the age of 21. I didn't rent. I bought and I rented a room out. And then, also pensions. I was lucky enough to work in a local authority where there was a pension scheme. I just stayed in there because I didn't understand how to get out. Yeah. But I'm really glad I stayed in.
So by default, rather than actual design. Okay, well, thank you to both of you and indeed to Jonathan for your views there tonight on that one.